there's not only lunch, but I will have to leave. There is more or less the scheduled end of this meeting, and I don't want to leave while the party is still in full flow. So let's make a start. I'm Paul David, and I have the honor to carry this session. We have our panel of people who are almost arranged themselves in the order going from. Did I turn you off now? There we go. Going down the table, William Button, Jared Hannah Galbraith, yes, and then Ricardo Duque has come slightly out of order, and then Jared Hunsinger and Johan Button. And we have an array of presentations as advertised on internet research. And the range of internet research is varied, and we will hear from about internet research on the impact of the internet on everyday life. Bill Dutton will start with. We'll hear about research on the role of internet in its impact on workers trying to alleviate poverty in different parts of Latin America. We're going to hear about the impact of the arrival of the internet on the agenda and the conduct of research in Chile from Ricardo, and put this in the context of other international comparative work from Jeremy Hunsinger is going to tell us about the view of what the character of internet research is from the perspective of an organization of internet researchers from AIR, and sort of trying to characterize what is distinctive about research on the internet. And Johan Bang is going to come back and again tell us about impact, but not just impact of the internet, but does speed make a difference? What is the impact of broadband on the way in which people use the services and what they do? Okay, so that's we've got a lot of intersection, different levels of impact, and we can get started. I'm going to let each person give their specific title, but I'll call on them first in order of the program. So first, Bill Button, who is a professor at Oxford University, fellow of Balliol College, and is the director of the Oxford Internet Institute, a relatively new organization about which I'm sure he'll tell you something before he goes on to discuss the substance of the research that he wants to describe.
Thank you, Paul. And let's see. Oh, very good. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to fly through this. Paul, how long?
I think target 15, 20 minutes,
Okay.
And then we would like to have enough time for the audience to discuss. Okay. We can take this down. I think we should. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, I'm going to speak about the role of the internet in everyday life, and I'm going to whiz through a lot of data, so don't worry about it, because I'll send it to you if you'd like, and there's more where this came from. But I'd like to leave you with about 6 ideas that I think are integrative and help you think about the role of the internet in everyday life and its impact. Most of all of what I'm going to say is based upon 2 sources. One is the Oxford Internet Surveys. We've done them in 2003 and 2005. National probability samples of Britain, not Northern Ireland, everyone 14 years old and over, face-to-face interviews. It's a high-quality data set. We have some very useful sponsorship from AOL, BT, Ofcom, Wanadu, but it's primarily funded by the OII through the hefty funding that we get. We In 2003 and 2005 each, we had excellent response rates, over 2,000 interviews in each case, with the latest survey having a 72% response rate. So I think we have a lot of confidence in our data. We don't do it every month. It's not market research, but I have data that we can truly trust and understand because we wrote the questions, et cetera. And we bridge our own survey with the surveys of other countries who are participating in the World Internet Project. And that was founded at UCLA. It's now at USC, where Herman is, and Jeff Cole is sort of the coordinator of that. We have almost 22 nations involved by now. Not all of them have data, but the Oxford Internet Surveys, it enables countries to look intensively at their own national patterns of internet use and development, but also to leverage that with the findings from other countries. So when you see data outside of Britain, that's the source of that are my partners within the World Internet Project. Just the first point I'd like to make is the point that the social implications of the internet are immense. I mean, everyone everyone talks about long-term implications of the internet on democracy or on productivity and so forth. But I think often those are very unpredictable, longer-term consequences. But if you look close to the internet, the major social implication that it immediately has is reconfiguring access, and it enables people to reconfigure access. And by that, let me give you a couple of examples. We ask people where they go first when they look for information. Like, for example, the name of a local MP. You can see in the light blue here whether they would use the internet to look for that. Turns out across a number of items of information that people would look for, the first or second place they go now is to the internet. So it's changing the way we look for information, the way we think about accessing information. It's often more important now than personally visiting a place or looking at using the telephone or a directory. It not only changes the way we get information, but it changes what information we get. So 20% of people say that they're actually reading stuff online, news online, that they do not get in print. 20% of the people make friends online, all right? Literally met people or made friends online. This is the UK sample. And if you look at outside the UK, people make a lot of friends online. So it varies widely by country. And by the way, in China and in Chile, when you see data, those are urban populations. They're not national probability samples because there's such a small rural population accessible to the internet. But people meet one or two people online that they then meet in person, or they meet people online that they never meet in person. But the point is it's not only changing how we communicate with people, but it's also changing your social networks. So it's reconfiguring access to people in several ways. And it's also providing new sources of information. I'm very disappointed how small the figures are in terms of blogging and website development, because I think the web enables people to produce, not just consume information. But still, one blogger in Iraq can make a huge difference in world news consumption. And there are a lot of bloggers, there are a lot of website developers in those small percentages in the British context. So the main impact of the internet, I think, is always to reconfigure access, and the strategic use of the internet by individuals, organizations, nations is to attempt to reconfigure access, not only to information, but to communication, to services, and to technologies themselves. It's unpredictable because other people are trying to do the same thing. And so it's the politics of reconfiguring access is what the information society is all about. The second theme that our data supports is the notion of the importance of the internet in that it is reinforcing socioeconomic digital divides. Digital divides are not going away based upon our survey research. If you look cross-nationally, of course, Britain fares fairly well, but the differences cross-nationally are dramatic in terms of the relative access of people to the internet. China has maybe, it's not on this chart because we don't have the random sample but, nationally, but it's about 6 to 7% of China online. And of course, it's the second largest country online, but but in terms of percentage, it's very small compared to the U.S. and in the 70 percentile range, and Scandinavian countries even higher than the U.S. in many cases. But even in Britain, even in the United States, the internet is plateaued. So the idea that the diffusion would continue at a dramatic pace is just not happening. That in Britain, if you look from between 2003 and 2005, there's almost no gain in the proportion of Britons online. The same thing, the plateauing of internet use has happened in the US at around 70%. So it's not inevitable at all that this divide is going to close. What has happened is the divide is widened because the people who are online are more likely now to have broadband. Between 2003 and 2005, the main difference has been in the adoption of broadband. So those online are integrating it more into their everyday life, and they're becoming more unlike those who are offline. So you can see the digital divide in a lot of ways. I mean, income, education, occupation still relates to access to the internet, access to broadband. You can also see it in Wi-Fi and mobile PDA access. So that higher income groups are the most likely to have Wi-Fi or PDA or mobile access to the internet. In other words, more likely to be able to integrate it into their own lives in a variety of ways by being able to get anytime, any place access to the internet. Clearly, this is not just a UK phenomenon. If you take the lowest and the highest quartile of income groups, you can see that the digital divide is a fairly universal phenomenon across all the nations that we looked at in the World Internet Project, where access is much more, where the internet is much more accessible to the highest quartile income group. But one thing the OII's research has done is we've said that as important as digital divides are, it's as important, if not more important, to focus on digital choice. Because it's not always the fact that economic or geographical barriers prevent people from getting online. Some people could easily get online if they chose to, but they choose not to do so. Take this. This is the most dramatic slide, I think, in the Oxford Internet Survey results. The difference across life stages. Pupils, people of school age or in school, almost everyone in Britain uses the internet somewhere. People of working age, less, but people who are retired or of retirement age, 30% or fewer use the internet at all. And I'm going to talk a lot more about age, but again, this is not limited to Britain. This varies cross-nationally, but the same pattern of a younger internet generation and an older analog generation has absolutely comes through survey after survey in the World Internet Project. I'd say choice because you'll also see that that the people who are not online are not interested in being online. So a large proportion of the people who are offline are not interested in the internet at all. If the red bar here, not interested at all, is the non-users. 60% of non-users say they're not interested at all in the internet. So I think internet choice matters as much as economic geographical barriers in thinking about how we get people online and bridge the gap between those who have access to resources and those who don't. And I'll get back to how we do that in a moment. But the other point I'd like to make is that these divides and choices, digital divides, digital choices, are reflected not just in whether a person has access to the internet, but it's also reflected in how they use the internet, which is, I think, interesting because clearly, just like if you have television with a dial, there's no economic barrier from you turning the dial to one channel versus another. There's no economic barrier from you clicking on one site versus another. But yet you see divides and choices reflected in use. We ask If you want to get, we actually, I think we're developing a new way of looking at use because we're moving away from the use of applications like email or the web to the use of the internet for different functions like downloading video, listening to music, etc. We ask in a very simple way, which we think can be reliable and cross-nationally valid, on average, how often do you do X? And whether from several times a day to never. We ask about a lot of things, and I won't go into this, but it's essentially everything from gambling and looking at sex sites to surfing the web. Almost everybody surfs the web, almost everybody sends email, but once you get beyond these very common activities, there's very few people that do the same thing. There's one thing that came out is the diversity of internet use. So we did a factor analysis of those items, and the first 6 factors are quite interesting. The first factor that captures the greatest amount of variance among users is entertainment use. So entertainment divides the sample more than any other class of factors, and that's downloading music, listening to music. The most predominant use is communication. Now that doesn't explain very much variance in the users because most people use the internet for communication, but communication is the most commonly used. That's the highest proportion of use and frequency of use. Just like email has always been the mainstream of the internet and its use. But these other factors are also very interesting. Information is second in terms of explaining variance. So let me just look at these 2 factors of entertainment and information use to show you what I mean by digital divides and digital choices being reflected in use. Here, use of the internet for information, very much along the lines of income groups. Partly that would be explained by student status, but it's not only explained by that. Use of information by level of expertise. The greater a person's self-rated ability to use the internet, the more likely they use it to access information. If you look by age, you see clearly age makes a difference in even accessing information, and it's not linear. We have no linear relationship between age and any use of the internet. It's almost always curvilinear, and age is, I'll get back to age in a moment. Gender differences, again, a digital choice, but men and boys more likely to use the internet for entertainment than girls or women. But here, look at use for entertainment by age. Clearly, entertainment is use of the internet for entertainment is by the younger people, and as you get older, you use it less. But that tail starts going up. We don't know whether the people who don't use it for entertainment are dying off, or they or what. But this curvilinear relationship is quite dramatic, and I will get back to age. Because I think one of the most fascinating things that came out of our survey is what we call this notion of internet generations. You know, it's anecdotal, it's commonly discussed is that, our kids are the internet generation, etc. But it is a dramatic pattern within our data. It's not just simply, retirement, work, pupils. If you take by age, break age down into even finer categories, it really descends by age. It's not just simply where you are in life patterns. And again, tell me what the explanation is. It could be aging, it could be life situation, whether you're working, for example, or going to school. It could be cohorts, where what technology is extant when you're, say, in school, or where you develop your habits. All 3 of these explanations could be important. Look at the places of access. If blue is you use the internet in one location, yellow is where you have 3 or more locations of use. By age, 14 to 17-year-olds have over half of them have 3 or more locations of use. Their own home, their friends, school, the library, etc. Older people, 75 and over, almost always have one location. Always on broadband. Clearly you have broadband, it's always on. No, because most people who have broadband use it the way they only put it on when they need it. So we ask people, do they use it, do they leave it on all the time, or do they only put it on when they're going to use it? And older people only put it on when they're going to use it, and younger people leave it on all the time. So there's even habit clearly and I'm not sure it's environmental consciousness. I think it's probably habit and patterns of use. Multitasking by age. You do more than one thing at a time when you're on the computer. Again, now this could be a biological explanation. Apparently it's harder for older people to multitask, I'm told. It's just simply, yeah? Yeah, I certainly have a difference. But it clearly comes out in the patterns across age group. And also, where would you go first for information? And in terms of the name of an MP, look at these. I mean, younger people will immediately go to the internet. Older people will not. Interest in the internet by age. Younger people are very interested. Older people are not interested. And whether the importance of the internet by age, how important do you believe the internet is to your life? Not very important to younger people, not important to older people. It's a huge factor, and I think in the last minute, I would just say one of the key factors in thinking about how we address this digital choice and the role of age in internet use is to remember that the internet is an experience technology. This is one of the major findings we had early on when we looked at internet use, was that in looking at trust in the internet, and here's one example of answering about reliability of information you can get online. People who have never used the internet are the most likely to say they have no idea of how reliable information is online. And if they give you an answer, if they do answer the question, they'll say they're more distrustful. Even people who've rejected the internet, have been on the internet and rejected it, are more trusting in the internet than non-users. People who've used the internet, and again, if you take proximity to the internet as years they've used it, how many hours per week they use it, and whether they have broadband versus narrowband, the more proximate they are to the internet, the more they tend to trust, they have a learned level of trust in the internet. And it's not wild levels of trust. They trust the internet about as much as they do broadcast news. All right? They trust it more in written than they do the newspapers, which I think is accurate. And and they don't, and it's not some kind of wild levels of total confidence in the internet. It's what I would call a learned level of critical skepticism. So people, when they experience the internet, they learn to trust it at a certain level, and that makes a difference. So that you see that experienced users behave much differently than novice users. Experienced users are more likely to meet friends online. They're more likely to make friends they never meet in person, and they're more likely to purchase online. And you can see that in many countries, especially developing countries, like Chile, for example, that Hernan's, which I think, well, you're not going to talk, someone's going to talk about.
I think we're going to let Hernan do it himself.
You'll see that the novice users are coming downstream, and there's going to be increased use for a wider variety of things. So those six concepts, I think, are the key bottom lines. Sorry, I took 5 more minutes.
Very good. Thank you. Okay. Hang on. So I'll ask you to introduce yourself and talk. Sorry. I think you're at the end of the tether now. So.
It's still possible.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not a Mac user, you can tell. My name is Hernan Galperin. I was briefly a colleague of Bill Dutton at USC before he left for greener pastures and joined Oxford. I'm still at USC, although as I'll be talking to you
Would it be
today.
helpful if you used the microphone?
Maybe the microphone, yeah. If you want to use the hand mic, you can do that.
I'll talk from here. As I was saying, I was a colleague of Bill at USC, and more recently I've also joined Universidad San Andres in Argentina, my home country, where I'll be coordinating what we're calling the Regional Dialogue on the Information Society, which is a network of researchers in Latin America concerned with ICT policy, in particular with ICT policy and poverty alleviation. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do two things. One is present in general the portfolio of projects that that what we call DIRSI, this Regional Dialogue on the Information Society, what DIRSI is doing overall in terms of its portfolio of projects. And then I'll take a little more time, if I have some time, to talk about what specifically my contribution has been to this and to this network. Where we start, the idea of starting this network came from the realization that even though the market reforms in the ICT sector in Latin America during the 90s did produce some impressive results, and here you can see, for example, how teledensity increased between 1990, which is about the time that most countries started reforms in the ICT sector in Latin America. And in 2003, you can see the fairly impressive increase, particularly with mobile telephony, and of course you can chart internet use, you can chart other things, and you'll see increasing penetration and access in the region. And yet, as Bill was saying, you also see increased disparities in the region. And this chart, for example, shows the disparities in terms of highest and the lowest teledensity per region in about 5 countries in Latin America. And you can see the disparities are very large, and in fact they've been increasing since the reforms. So that's the title of the slide. Before the reforms in Latin America, we really had universally bad service. It was more democratic in a way because everybody got very bad service. Well, the reality is only a few people got really bad service. What we see today is in the main cities and capitals, you have world-class, first-class service as you were in the developed world, and outside the main capitals and cities, you have very, very bad service and still a lot of access gaps. So we start from this premise that even though the reforms have produced very impressive increases in terms of ICT penetration, the disparities are still very, very large. So we start thinking in the second generation of reforms, how do you start thinking about ways of closing this type of gaps? So we start from this premise, and our aim is to really inform the policy debate. We were launching projects that would hopefully inform the policy debate in terms of how do you build a second generation of reforms that is more inclusive, that gets more people effective participation in information knowledge society. We call this the pro-core, pro-market approach, P3M. And the way we work, and I was discussing this with Legardo, I think I might well be one of his subjects because we have a very flat network structure. We're today 12 researchers across Latin America. We basically meet face-to-face maybe once a year. So we conduct all our business online. And as one of the coordinators of the research, I can tell you it's very, very challenging, and I hope Rick will enlighten me on how do I make this network work more effectively. And our research agenda, we essentially started from four broad themes. The first thing that we started is we wanted to go beyond simply measuring access. We wanted to go beyond penetration, ITU numbers. So we started talking about this concept of digital poverty. How do you measure this concept that it's not only about do people get access or not, how much access they get, but really what kind of access they get, what type of access, and how effectively they can put that access to improve their lives, to alleviate poverty, to get better education, and so on. So we started thinking in the lines of an index of digital poverty. And this is work done by 2 economists in our network based in Peru and Bolivia. We started thinking, how do if we can measure the number of calories that one needs in a day, can we measure the amount of information that one needs in a day? Can we start thinking along those lines to have an index of digital poverty that goes beyond simply the question of access? So this is work done in this area. And the second line of work we engaged was the institutional design of the regulator. As you probably know, the regulators in the Latin America region are very new. They were created during the 90s. Even some were created after reforms were made. So regulation was really a bit of an afterthought for governments as they were privatizing and liberalizing markets in the 90s. So we started engaging in these questions because we identified a lot of problems with the type of regulation, the institutional design of the regulation, the kind of representation that exists in the regulator, capture issues, representation of minorities, all kinds of issues related to the policymaking process that the regulator engages in. And this is work done by a colleague in Colombia who's compared, essentially taken some benchmark, what Ofcom, what FCC, what Australia, Singapore, a number of examples in terms of different models that exist to avoid capture, to make the regulator better represented by different interest groups. Third broad line of inquiry of this research network is the evaluation of universal access policies. Again, these were also afterthoughts to the liberalization process, but there are many countries, or most countries in the region, have in one way or another universal access programs. We wanted to evaluate them to be able to say, well, what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are the successful models, what are the benchmarks for universal access policies. And this is, I'm going to present you because I'm engaged in some of the results. I'm going to present you some of the results in this line of inquiry. As well as the fourth, which is my main line of inquiry, which is try to think of different ways or alternative ways in which networks can be built and operated. We identified still infrastructure issues as one of the main barriers for access in the region. So this line of inquiry has to do with, are there new ways, are new technologies allowing new ways for building and operating networks that were not present in the past? And again, I'm going to be presenting you some of the results of this line of inquiry. And they'll be very brief because I only have 5 minutes. But actually, we just published this book which compiles the results. So I think I'm going to very much let you browse through the book, which is available online. I'll give you the address in a minute. So all the results of all the lines of inquiry that I just mentioned are compiled in this book, which I edited with my colleague Judith from Mexico. And we're going to have a full day of presentations of these results, November 17, my room in the Grand Center. So I'm going to do here in a very briefly is present what my part of this research network is about. Essentially, what we say in the research is there's been a traditional answer to the problem of access, which is universal access policies. Now, universal access policies are very difficult to implement, and they're never perfect, and they're particularly difficult to implement in Latin America because regulators are new. They're weakly structured. They don't have a lot of capacity. They don't have a lot of money, honestly. Sustainability is a problem. Programs get implemented. They get pulled out when the government needs the money. So we say, what can we think beyond this traditional answer of big government comes and subsidizes large operators to build the networks. We identified what we call the micro-telco alternative, which is, what if instead of the government subsidizing the big telco to go and build a network where it wouldn't go because they don't see a profit there, what if we actually create the conditions for communities, local people themselves to build a network and tie in to the national backbone? And we call that a micro-telco. And when we started looking at this, we said, well, this is not a new idea, really. It's been there forever. Communities in one way or another have always done this. And particularly if you look at water sanitation, they've done this forever in Latin America. There's many, many great examples of micro-entrepreneurs, communities, municipalities engaged in providing basic services, particularly, again, in territories where the large operators have no interest in going. And we've identified a number of models for micro-telcos, from local entrepreneur models to municipal models to community or based organization models, all based on, interestingly, on very hybrid arrangements. They're never purely a private company or a public company. They're always a mix of a little bit of community action, a little bit of municipal government puts resources, a little bit of private entrepreneurship. There's always a very interesting mix, so we call that the kinds of hybrid arrangements. And we also see a lot of innovation in this micro-telcos. Some of the innovations that they've done are very impressive, both in terms of adopting technologies, because micro-telcos are always looking for ways to do it very cheaply, because they have to serve people who are usually poor, who are usually rural. They have to serve them very cheaply. So Wi-Fi, WiMAX, you name it. These micro-telcos have to play with everything, as well as traditional forward networks, all kinds of new and innovative models, because micro-telcos need to serve people on the very cheap. So we also look into different business models, low-cost technology, and so on that the micro-telcos have adopted. These are our questions. Let me briefly answer. Importance and trends, we see a growing trend of micro-telcos in the region. Business models I just discussed. Quality performance, this is interesting. In the literature, when you look at micro-entrepreneurs in water and sanitation, in telecommunications, the literature usually says, oh yes, they exist, but they usually, they're very poor. They serve people very poorly. We found that it's actually not the case. That a lot of times micro-telcos serve people quite well. Maybe not, they serve people at different price quality points. I think that's the important thing. They serve people at different price quality points, and that's critical. Because you need to serve, again, these people on the very cheap, and they do that very well, whereas the large operators, when they go into these territories, they usually come with the same business model and mindset of serving large urban areas, which typically don't work. So the affordability threshold is very high, whereas micro-telco can lower usually the affordability threshold with a very, actually with not so bad quality as you would think. And I think I'll stop here, but one thing I'll mention is when we did a lot of research is on the policy environment. What kind of policy and regulatory environment exists in the region? Is it encouraging micro-telco experiments, or is it not? I think the answer is mixed, but we've identified a lot of barriers in the regulation for micro-telco experiments to exist, both in terms of little access to licenses, little access to spectrum. We've identified the regulation of spectrum as one of the main problems. Very little unlicensed spectrum exists in Latin America, and we identified that. We've identified interconnection issues. We've identified a number of issues where we can say the regulatory environment is really not friendly for these micro-telco experiments, and we propose a number of ways in which very easily the environment could be made much more, at least that will allow these experiments to take place and to flourish. I think I'll stop here, because otherwise Paul will keep pointing signs at me.
The URL.
And the URL is tunis.net. Thank you for that. Where the book is available for download, and you can download each of the chapters as well as a book. And again, on November 17, you can hear a whole day of presentation by each of the researchers on each of these lines of inquiry as well as ours. Thank you.
Thank you. in our order is Ricardo Peluque. Yes, Peluque. Sorry. We'll hear him explain about Internet Gold Pay.
It's open.
Oh, it is open, thank you very much. Yeah, but I probably won't be able to find it on a Mac. I was once, and then I went to the dark side.
Oh, wait, can you tell me which it is?
It's this one.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. My name is Rick Duque, and I'm not only representing myself, but representing a large group of people that have been working on science in developing countries and how the internet is impacting work product and also personal networks. So I hear I'm now representing, for the Chile side, not only Wesley Schrum, my mentor and colleague, but also two collaborators in Chile, in the University of Concepcion, Omar Barriga Jr. and Guillermo Enriquez. Very good. In interest of being cut off, because I will be cut off, I decided to use a method that I think was used in the last session. I'm just giving you my. I think actually Mr. Collins gave me that. I just put my summary in the front end, and then you can cut me off right away. Really quickly, the Chilean arm of the project is right now in the first phase, which is a qualitative phase. We use digital video interviews, and we interviewed 28 Chilean scientists covering their work histories, professional networks, and internet practice. And really quickly, what we found were these researchers, some of these researchers are becoming visible, which is an issue for us traditionally in studying science in developing countries. Researchers there tend to be not visible, have the expectation they're not visible because they don't publish as frequently as those in developed countries or get cited. But the internet is, in the case, making people visible in very interesting ways. There are some cases of researchers actually using the internet as a method, employing it in ways that are very unique to the setting in Chile, but I think also unique in settings in developing countries, and I'll explain that a little later. And also, but I have to say across the board, they're all using it to circumvent the limited local resources, library infrastructures, and the ability to get immediate literatures in their field. And also they're circumventing international intellectual property rights very readily. They understand what they're doing, and some of my colleagues here in the developed world also do it as well, so they didn't find that very interesting. But it does, they find it as commonplace, but it does bring up these issues that are being highlighted not only with WSIS, but here as well with this copyright issues. So that's the quick, the neat and dirty of the qualitative work. There's much more, but I'm not going to bring it up here. There is another phase, a second phase, which we're in the process of doing, hopefully completing soon, and it is the administration of a communication and network survey for 300 Chilean scientists, and it's going to be completed hopefully soon. And that leads me to sort of giving an overview, not a quick one unfortunately, of the project of which I have been brought into, which is a world science project looking at productivity and collaboration in the developing world, and how the internet and how email is mediating these scientific practices. I have the great pleasure to have one of our colleagues here, Dr. Paul Bhatia from Kenya, and he's one of, again, I'm representing this larger group as well, including Dr. Cyril Morty, who's going to be chairing the closing plenary, and unfortunately Dan Bright Zorba from Ghana was not available here, but hopefully I can represent him well in his absence. And very quickly, just again with that same idea, I'm giving you the quick and dirty right up front. What we found in this in our quantitative analysis of 300 scientists, they're looking at their scientific practice, their attitudes towards IT, and also the use of IT, and their networks, was the collaboration does not necessarily lead to a general increment in productivity. And also that email does not reduce the problems of collaboration, but we find that difficulties are structured more by social contacts and not necessarily by a collaborative process. And I'll explain those a little bit as well. So what is the collaboration paradox? As we see it, those conditions that unsettle the relationship between collaboration and productivity in developing areas, for example, lack of resources, and also disjointed sectoral networks, may undermine the collaborative benefits of new information and communication technologies. Some things that I'm sure a lot of people are highlighting here. Paul Bhatia highlighted it in the plenary opening. Plenary Celso Candido highlighted the issues in Brazil as well. And I actually think also, Hernan talked about these kind of class distinctions as well, these diverse class way different people from different parts of society access the internet. So the literature that drives this survey arm of our research is really formed around the question of understanding how science knowledge production is in the developing world compared to how it is in places like the U.S. or Europe. There's a lot of work done in the United States and Europe on collaboration and productivity, but unfortunately not a lot done in the developing world, which is kind of why we are involved in doing this, to add to the literature. One way that, at least in the developed world, they tracked publications or collaboration is through bibliometrics. And Patricia Campion mentioned in her session that this is a technique that may not account for the true productivity of collaboration of developing world scientists, because a lot of the journals they publish in are not represented in the databases. And so we knew in order to measure this properly, we needed to ask it directly. We do ask it directly. Ask them to list the different ways that they do produce and also the different kinds of collaborative relationships they have. The other literature looks at the relationship between collaboration and productivity. Collaboration has, in the last decade, taken on a sort of a spirit of its own, that collaboration is good just for collaborative sake. That may hold true in the developing world, and the literature does suggest that there is a positive relationship between these two variables. But again, not much work done in the developing world, so we're finding that our experience in places like Africa and India sort of contradict this, and I'll explain that a little bit later too. And finally, how new ICTs are varying, how they are impacting scientific collaboration. The literature, again, in the developing world suggests there is a positive relationship. That use of email does reduce problems in collaboration. The transaction costs to collaboration seem to be reduced, and it creates more opportunities for networking as well. And again, technology used prolifically by developing world scientists, but unsure of that relationship in the developing world. And our findings, as I stated up front, do contradict that as well. So the research questions that lead us in this survey phase: what is the relationship between patterns of collaboration and productivity in less developed areas? And also, does access to information and communication technologies reduce problems of collaboration? The context of this study was Kerala, and also Kenya and Ghana. And for anyone interested in more further understanding the Kerala model, the next session that follows this is a Kerala session, so you can understand them more. But they are attributed to a very unique developmental model, which made its goals as social development versus economic development. So you have high social indices, but very low economic development there. But we structured our research as putting them as high development in our model. Kenya followed. They are one of the oldest and largest knowledge scientific communities in Africa, and also Nairobi is home to a lot of international institutes and multilateral institutes, which do give Kenyan researchers some advantage in having international contact, but staying at home, which also we consider as well. And we consider Kenya, at least at the time when this survey was done, to be the median of the three countries. Ghana is considered, and they promote this as the ICT gateway, as the gateway for many things to Western Africa, and they probably have a good reason to say so. The countries around them, many francophone, are in much more dire situations than Ghana. Ghana is a very peaceful and seemingly on its way to benefiting from some of the restructuring that occurred in the last 20 years there. And they have made a huge push, probably more so than any country in Africa, in deregulating their ICT, deregulating their policies that allow for this competitive market and also attracting and creating sort of an atmosphere for ICT innovation. I would say that where the U.S. has the Silicon Valley, and the East Coast would say have the Silicon Alley, Ghana has the Silicon Shell. It's not that big, but it is very intense, and anyone who's in ICT goes to this one particular place called Busy Internet, which is a combination of internet cafe and also IT journalism and also IT innovation. So if anybody's interested in going to Ghana, go to Busy Internet and you'll find this sort of laboratory of ICT. And it's something that we have not found in other places. Well, the methodology for this arm of the study, it's based on a 1994 survey done in the same areas, 100 scientists in each area. And we followed that up, and this is before the internet hit. So there were a fair few internet questions in the 94 survey, but that was followed up in 2000 and 2002 in the same areas with a variety of internet questions. So there can be some comparison between the two. It's not a panel study, but it could be analyzed in a longitudinal fashion. This 2000 and 2002 survey is a part of a longer study that's NSF funded, which includes both survey interview techniques, which we're doing, and then the digital video arm that we're including now. The sample size for 2002, unlike 94, was 918 scientists, and they're located primarily in university departments and government research institutes, because we wanted to see if there was a sectoral difference too, if institutional pressures made differences in how people adopted ICT and how they published and how they collaborated. And these surveys were conducted face-to-face by a locally trained team of graduate students, led by our collaborators in those countries. The variables we looked at, there are many. First external collaboration was a sum of 3 main projects that respondents reported as being collaborative. Productivity was measured as domestic and international publications in the last 5 years that they reported. Email was measured as access, although in other analysis we do include diversity as well, but for this analysis we just include access, because access in the developing world is still an issue. It may not be in the developed world, now we are moving on to diversity, but it's still an issue, and it was an issue there that, literally you have rates that access made a difference. And the problems in collaboration were measured as an attitudinal scale of problems in contacting people, transmitting information, security of information, and keeping people informed. We conducted descriptive means and regression analysis, and we controlled for a variety of things that the literature suggested we should control for. And I'll be happy to talk about those a little later. First, the descriptive statistics. Carolyn's or Maya-Valley's, they were very productive in those 5 years, much more, almost at twice the rate as their African colleagues. The current collaboration, the Kenyans were much more collaborative than the Indians. Access to email, the Indians again had very high access rates and unable to access email. The Indians again had very consistent access, where the Africans were more challenged in getting consistent access, and that to us again was an important variable to look at. So findings from our regression, for the full sample, collaboration seemed unrelated to productivity in less developed regions in our study. So where they find a relationship in the developed world, we were not able to satisfactorily find one in our study. For the subset of scientists and research institutes, as opposed to academic institutes, collaboration seemed to actually hinder productivity, which was, again, very counterintuitive. Only in the Kenyan academic sector was collaboration clearly associated with productivity, but as you saw from the earlier figure, Kenyans produced the least among the 3 countries. Now findings from a mean comparison on problems of collaboration. Collaboration associated with reporting more problems, which we expect. When you're involved in distributed work, the transaction costs do cause people to say, yeah, there's communication problems, there's coordination problems. Access to email is associated with reporting fewer problems. So in essence, that is sort of supporting the idea that email use does alleviate some of these issues. Kenyans are more likely to report more problems. They also are more likely to collaborate, I'll mention that later. And the Indians are more likely to report fewer problems. So what does that lead us to conclude, at least with our sample that we studied? The Indians collaborate the least, yet produce the most, have the more consistent access to email, and report the fewest problems in collaboration, which suggests in this context, and because India is a different region, has its own ICT infrastructure, a large educational system, but does suggest that you don't want to collaborate, but you do want to use email to reduce problems in doing research. So use the email, but don't increase your collaboration, and you produce high levels. The Kenyans collaborate the most, produce the least, have inconsistent access to email, and report the most problems in collaboration, which again, the counterintuition of that. So the policy implications are, should we be emphasizing collaboration in developing regions if the problems associated with it are magnified in this context? And should we be investing in new ICT infrastructure in developing regions if they cannot adequately sustain them? Which are a host of other qualitative findings we find in studying how we actually hope to connect some of the institutes that we're dealing with, some of the bureaucracy we're dealing with, cultural obstacles we're dealing with, and also just economic realities that we're dealing with. So what about Chile? And I only have a few moments, but I've already given you the secrets of Chile, so I don't feel bad if I get cut off. What leads us to Chile are literatures which involve neo-institutional perspectives, dependency, and globalization of theory. I won't cover them, but you're welcome to ask me later. But looking at the internet as an elixir, will it really improve the scientific situation or the research sector, the affliction or the teething arguments? And the legacy of the golpe for us is very important because this was sort of a marked point in the history of Chile that had profound effects socially, broadly, but also profound effects in the research sector. A lot of researchers were exiled, university departments dissolved, and also linkages with foreign institutes and foreign funding were cut off for a long time, almost 2 decades. We look at the internet as a new kind of golpe. Again, the unintended consequences of the first golpe had affected the research sector, where the internet may be affecting it in ways that people may not perceive as well. And I may not be able to get into those now, but eventually I hope we can publish on it and you can read that. But really quickly, the Chilean context, there are 25 major research universities. There are a few doctoral degree programs offered in Chile, so a lot of the advanced training happens in Europe and the United States and sometimes in Australia. These bring up some issues of institutionalization, of dependency as well. I won't talk about them in detail, but they do create these they do lend light to these kind of perspectives. Salaries are low. The neoliberal economic model is now being applied for the last 10 years in the research sector, where researchers in private, public, and also business are competing for funding, which changes the landscape of the sector, something that Paul David was talking about in his discussion about how you restructure priorities in research. There is an imperative for researchers who get public funding or have public universities to publish in EC high-impact journals, which has impacts that refer to dependency issues, where there are many EC journals that are in Spanish or in Chile, which means gatekeepers to research and knowledge are abroad, which does bring up this new kind of sort of a knowledge colonialism, if you will. Finally, Chile produces about 12% of Latin American publications, but they're the 5th largest producer of publications in the continent, or in Latin America. Internet diffusion and publications. Universities, good, I'm finishing up. Universities are networked with a high-speed connection since 1986, and they were connected in 1995. And for the most part, the researchers in our study, in the qualitative arm, are very well connected. They use it very consistently. There are very few breakdowns. But during that same time, as the diffusion of computers and internet, there was a steady low productivity by Chilean scientists, 0.2 a year per scientist. They're now asked to publish 2 a year, which does sort of lead to great hope, but it may not be structurally possible. There's a dramatic increase in publications in foreign journals in the last decade, so that may explain what could explain this 0.2 or this even sort of publication activity over that course of the diffusion of the internet could be explained in the sense that they're producing less domestically and producing more internationally, which holds, again, another host of dependency issues of knowledge, where knowledge is being published and under what circumstances. So I have maybe 30 seconds, and I'll quickly say that the 20 researchers we video interviewed came from 3 regions of the country, 5 universities, and the topics were professional antecedents, present projects, and managing professional networks, and internet history and present practices. And our preliminary findings, echoing what I already said, is, well, actually, I won't get into this, but I'll say that what I didn't mention, the first 2, I interviewed a gentleman who had been researching in the 60s before the internet, and he did it the old-fashioned way. He wrote to researchers abroad, he collected names and information from abstract volumes, basically conducting the same things that researchers always have done. And he did it very, very well. And the internet has obviously made things easy, but for him, he saw no difference. He did the same thing he did before. It's just maybe a little more quicker. But he did bring up a host of other unintended limitations. For example, the internet has opened the market for publication. So in his experience, in his time, he was able to publish something readily in an appropriate amount of time. Now the queue, he says, is so much longer because the internet has opened it up. And that's an unintended thing that maybe people may not look at. And finally, there is the case of Guillermo Enriquez, who is a sociologist who used the internet to find a sample of professionals who had been exiled for 20 years. And he used it to survey them on their immigration behaviors, patterns, and attitudes. And only the internet only having the internet would make this research possible. Only being himself in exile would have made this question even important. Only being from Chile would have been made, or from a country that had dealt with this kind of coup d'etat or golpe that affected the research sector, would have made this question even important. And the internet helped him do this. Why? Because this country was not going to give him money to travel to 40 countries and to interview 500 exile researchers. But the internet allowed him to do that, and also to communicate with them. Okay, so I'll finish there and be happy to give him the lecture. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.